Welcome to episode 82 of Lucretius Today. I'm your host Cassius, and together with my panelists from the EpicureanFriends.com forum, we'll walk you through the 6 books of Lucretius's poem, and we'll discuss how Epicurean philosophy can apply to you today. We encourage you to study Epicurus for yourself, and we suggest the best place to start is the book Epicurus and His Philosophy by Canadian professor Norman DeWitt. For anyone who's not familiar with our podcast, please visit EpicureanFriends.com, where you'll find much more information about our goals and our ground rules. If you have any questions about those, please be sure to contact us at the forum and leave your comments in the thread for this episode. In this episode 82, we will begin reading Book 6 of the poem, and we'll discuss Lucretius's restatement of the significance of Epicurus and the benefit of his philosophy. Now let's join Don reading today's text.
Renowned Athens, first to wretched man gave the sweet fruits, and human life refreshed, and published laws, but comforts nobler far than these she gave, when to the world she showed great Epicurus, formed with such a soul, who from his mouth delivered sublime truths, as from an oracle, whose fame for so divine discoveries dispersed every way abroad, and was raised after death above the skies. For when he saw how little would suffice for necessary use, and by what provisions life might be preserved, that nature had prepared everything ready to support mankind, that men abounded with wealth, and were loaded with honor and applause, and happy in their private concerns, in the good character of their children, and yet their minds were restless at home, complaining and lamenting the misery of their condition. He perceived the vessel itself, the mind, was the cause of the calamity, and by the corruption of that, everything, though ever so good, that was poured into it was tainted. It was full of holes and run out, and so could never by any means be filled, and whatever it received within it infected with a stinking smell. And therefore he purged the mind by true philosophy, and set bounds to our desires and our fears. He laid open to us the chief good, that point of happiness we all aim at, in what it consists, and showed us the direct way that leads to it, and puts us into the straight road to obtain it. He taught what misfortunes commonly attend human life, whether they flow from the laws of nature or from chance, whether from necessity or by accident, and by what means we are to oppose those evils and strive against them. And he has fully proved that men torment themselves in vain and are tossed about in a tempestuous ocean of cares to no purpose. For as boys tremble and fear everything in the dark night, so we in open day fear things in as vain, and little to be dreaded, and those that children quake at in the dark, and fancy advancing towards them. This terror of the mind, this darkness then, not the sun's beams nor the bright rays of day can scatter, but the light of nature and the rules of reason, and therefore I shall the more readily proceed to execute what I have begun. And since I taught the fabric of the world was mortal, and that the heavens are formed of corruptible seeds, and whatever they do or ever will contain must necessarily be dissolved, attend now to what remains, especially since the hope of carrying the prize has encouraged me to ascend the chariot and engage in so noble a race. And since the difficulties that once attended the course are removed, and the roughness of the way is made favorable and easy, the various wonders men behold in the earth and in the heavens perplex their minds, trembling and in suspense, and make them humble with the fear of the gods, and press them groveling to the ground. And being ignorant of the cause of these events, they are forced to confess the sovereignty and give up everything to the command of these deities. And the effects they are unable to account for by reason, they imagine were brought about by the influence of the gods. For such as well know that the gods lead a life of tranquility and ease, if they should still wonder by what power the world is carried on, especially in the things they see over their heads in the heavens above, they relapse again into their old superstition. They raise over themselves a set of cruel tyrants who, the wretches fancy, can do all things, because they know nothing of what can or cannot be, or by what means a finite power is fixed to every being, and a boundary immovable which it cannot pass. Such are more liable to mistakes, and to be carried widely from the right way. Unless you purge your mind of such conceits, and banish them your breast, and forbear to think unworthily of the gods, by charging them with things that break their peace, those sacred deities who will believe are always angry and offended with you. Not that the supreme power of the gods can be so ruffled as to be eager to punish severely in their resentments, but because you fancy those beings, who enjoy perfect peace in themselves, are subject to anger and the extravagances of revenge, and therefore you will no more approach their shrines with an easy mind, No more in tranquility and peace will you be able to receive the images, the representations of their divine forms that form from their pure bodies and strike powerfully upon the minds of men. From hence you may collect what a wretched life you are to lead. That the rules, therefore, of right reason may keep these evils at the greatest distance from us, though I have offered many things upon the subject before, yet much still remains to be observed, which I shall adorn with the smoothest verse. And first, the nature and phenomenons of the heavens must be explained. And now I sing of tempests and the flaming blasts of lightning, how they fly and from what cause they dart through all the air, lest when you view the several parts of heaven you tremble and mad with superstitions ask whence come this winged fire, and to what quarter of heaven does it direct its course? How does it pierce through walls of stone, and having spent its rage goes out again? The causes of which events, since men cannot assign by the laws of reason, they must, they suppose, be affected by the power of the gods. And thou, Calliope, my skillful muse, the joy of men and pleasure of the gods, lead on the course and guide me to the goal, that by thy conduct I may gain a crown and end the race with glory.
Don, thank you for reading that today. As usual, at the beginning of each book, we have a very interesting and I should say inspiring section, I think, talking about the role of Epicurus generally and what he has done for us and how significant he is in history. And there's a lot in this section today. I guess we'll see if we finish it. There's so much that he covers in the beginning of each of these 6 books that there's always a lot to talk about.
I find it interesting that the translation here includes the name of Epicurus, but that's not actually in the original Latin. I checked, and the only place that he's named by name in the whole poem is in Book 3, line 1042, and that one is Epicurus himself died when the light of life had run its course. So that's the only place where his name actually appears in the whole poem.
Now, that's an interesting bit of trivia I was not aware of. Very interesting.
So he names him whenever he talks about the fact that he died. So I think that's
Well, then that's another example of how the translators feel they have the right to add things in and change Lucretius's decisions. So it's always good to pick those, to keep those things in mind. This would almost certainly be a non-controversial one because surely he's not talking about anybody but Epicurus, but sometimes it's not so clear.
Exactly. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that's why the translators would put it in. It's like, if they just said the man from Athens or something like that, the person reading it might say, well, who are they talking about? And so they literally just, stick it in there as almost a parenthetical statement. But the fact that it's not in the Latin, I think, is maybe not significant, but at least interesting, because like I said, the fact that he only uses him by name whenever he talks about him dying is just to sort of hammer home that, everybody's going to die. Even Epicurus died.
I was going to just skip on over that, but maybe we shouldn't skip over it. I wonder why he would use that poetic
device. Yeah.
Why would Lucretius use the device of not naming Epicurus when it's clear that that's who he's talking about?
To avoid repetition. If you just keep repeating his name, it just sounds annoying. And he uses then a metaphor at those. But by the way, what metaphor is used here now for in this passage for Epicurus?
Yeah, what metaphor is used?
How do the other translations handle that particular section right at the beginning?
When I'm looking at the Loeb edition, and the Loeb says, Athens first gave the sweet consolations of life when she brought forth a man endowed with such wisdom. So just a man.
Yeah. So he talks about his wisdom and talks about but he doesn't say him by name.
And that's the general method that appears everywhere except the position you mentioned earlier, then I guess, Don. Is the context in which he's writing just so clear that he feels absolutely no reason to name him? Or is there any sense of course, there's the religious viewpoint sometimes of those religions who don't name their deity. Is there any, I wouldn't think there's any real aspect of that, but I can imagine somebody asking that.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because I don't know about the repetition thing. I mean, Martin, I'm sure that has some role in it, but he doesn't really come up that much than at the beginning of the books.
If you think about it, the section in Book 3 where he's named is the one where Lucretius is talking about all the people that have died. And, you got Ancus the Good and Scipio and Homer and Democritus and, Epicurus himself died. And so he lists all the people in history that have died. And, you're obviously not going to live forever either. So you're going to die too. But in the proems or in the hymns to Epicurus at the beginning of each book, he doesn't name him there. which I think is kind of interesting. He
Yeah,
names them in
right,
like the end of book 3 whenever he's listed a bunch of other people, just in among others. But whenever he's singing the praises of Epicurus, he doesn't actually use his name, which I think is just, I mean, like I said, I'm not sure that it's significant, but it's at least interesting.
Well, yeah, that's why I'm talking about it. I mean, even in the very beginning, you would think that maybe in the beginning of book 1, he would mention Epicurus once.
Oh, yeah, by the way, here's who we're talking about.
Yeah, and then not continue it on out of concern about repetition. But I would have thought the first time he might have mentioned Epicurus's name. Is there any other possible reason besides just the repetition concern? I guess maybe it does have that same connotation of we all know who we're talking about here, and he may not be a god. Well, of course, they do compare him to a god in one of the preambles. You're right about that. I don't know whether any of the religions of that time were known for not pronouncing the name of their god or not. But anyway, I guess I don't have a better solution.
Yeah, it's sort of just food for thought. So I would be interested if anybody has any ideas on the forum if they want to post any thoughts on that. But like I said, I just thought it was an interesting little piece of trivia.
Right. And in that first section, he talks about how his fame for such divine discoveries has dispersed every way abroad and has been raised after death above the skies.
Yeah, that took me by surprise there.
That's almost a semi-religious reference as well.
Mm-hmm. Is that because, is he talking about the intermundia with the other Epicurean gods, or?
Yeah, I think when you combine above the skies with the divine discoveries, you really are having that same illusion that he's kind of mentioned in the other preamble. I forget which it was, whether it's book 4 or book 5, where he actually says Epicurus was a god.
It's interesting. It's interesting that our translation here has raised above the skies. But in the Loeb translation, it has now exalted to the skies.
Yeah.
So that's a whole different connotation there. And the Latin is just ad caelum. So
to the skies.
I think, like ad astra and that sort of thing. The vicissitudes of translation, once again.
Yes, indeed. And then this next section that's labeled as paragraph 9 is also one of the sections that I regularly refer to as one of the best summaries of the significance of Epicurus and why he's important and what he offers and so forth.
I think you're right. I think it's a good solid summary.
First of all, and this is by far not the most significant thing, but the thing you mentioned at the very beginning, Don, about how the translators will insert a word. We got one of those situations here when he talks about the vessel, and in this translation, he's actually put parentheses around it, if I recall correctly, the mind. I see that the Loeb translation does a footnote, and the Loeb translation, I believe, inserts. Actually, the Loeb doesn't put the mind in the text. It just puts a footnote and says it's a reference to the mind. But it hasn't always been obvious to me that we should necessarily assume that the vessel was a reference to the mind, because I'm thinking to myself over the years that it's also possible that he could be talking just about the person's or philosophy or religion, or in terms of the vessel, the vessel, I guess our life, our body, our way of thinking could all be possible things that corrupt everything. Because, of course, he's talking about whatever it is, the vessel itself has corrupted everything and tainted it and caused it to be infected with a stinking smell. And it hasn't always been clear to me that he would be so condemning of just a general reference to the mind. Or at least if he is referring to the mind, he's also including what it is that's corrupting the mind.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the vessel itself is not necessarily the problem, but he's talking about that it's it's full of holes. It needs to be. It sounds like the vessel needs to be repaired, and Epicurus was the one that brought the tools to repair it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's possible to construe it that he's saying that the human mind in its natural state is somehow inclined to this kind of corruption, and I guess
or the opposite, that the vessel in its natural state is a good thing, but it's become corrupted and gotten holes in it, and it needs to be returned to its natural state.
Yeah. Martin, you got any thought on that? Because that has always been an interesting question in my mind, how to read that. Because he's saying he purged the mind by true philosophy. Well, I wonder if the mind is also...
So it's like he flushed it out. It's like he flushed the mind out.
Which is kind of saying to me potentially that what he's flushing out that's bad is false philosophy. If he's saying he purged the mind by true philosophy, maybe he's just replacing the false with the true. But I know there is a more of a connotation that there's these holes in the vessel. I'm not sure that that's a good analogy for philosophy.
Well, I think he's talking. I mean, I would interpret that, and I'm sorry, I'm talking over Martin if he wanted to chime in. The holes I think are like the corrosive philosophy that, like you were saying, superstition and religion and bad reasoning and other philosophies that they've corroded the. Think of it as a pot, a vessel, a pot that had some sort of corrosive substance in it, and it got holes in it, and it's all slimy and everything inside. And so Epicurus comes along and he pours out the bad stuff and patches the holes, and then you can actually fill it. And it's the whole idea, I think, that you've talked about with the limits of pleasure and the full vessel and that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, and just Martin, we're going to go to you here now, but I'm reading the lobe. It says he understood that the pot itself made the flaw. Martin, go ahead and weigh in. Do you think he's talking about something that humans are born with, or is he talking about corruption that came after birth?
I mean, the corruption, just by choosing the word corruption, it's something what happened. That means by nature it's not like that, but the false goals given by the environment, they let then people grow these wrong concepts in their mind and get these holes, so that again, this analogy with the holes is a bit weird. I cannot really fully get the advantage of that one, but by calling a mind like that corrupted, that makes sense.
And of course, the leaky vessel analogy, Don, that's more your department. That's a particular Greek allusion, right? The maidens are always, there's some group of maidens who are sentenced to having to fill leaky vessels that can never be filled.
And there's that Bible parable too, if I remember correctly, that they brought leaky vessels or something like that.
Yeah, now
for the wedding party or something.
Now wash your mouth out and let's go back to the true philosophy and not the wrong aspects of Western civilization. But the Danaids. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. You're right. And I always think it's interesting to look at Stalling's translation simply because she has that poetic license, I think, that she takes sometimes, but I think it's helpful to get a different perspective. And that section in her translation goes, he understood it was the vessel itself that was to blame, and that by means of its internal flaw, all things that came inside it from without, however sweet at first, went sour. Partly he saw, since it had holes and leaked, and by no power could anything fill it, partly since when anything was placed inside the vessel, it was corrupted with an evil taste. Yeah. So that's the opposite, I think, of what I was thinking. So
I find it difficult, or maybe even impossible, to think, though, that Epicurus would say that the way the mind was born would be the cause. Right. Since we were talking about that Greek analogy, is it the Danaids? For some reason that's in my mind because of one of the other translations, but maybe there's a clue there, because I don't know the derivation of the myth about whether their vessels were already from the very beginning leaky, or whether they were pierced or made full of holes as a part of their sentence because they did something wrong or something. I'm thinking that there's some reason that they're using these leaky vessels to try to fill them, that they're not just stupid and they're not just born that way, but they were sentenced.
Yeah. Relying on Wikipedia, unfortunately. So they killed their husbands on their wedding nights, and they were condemned to spend eternity carrying water in a sieve or a perforated device. So that was so they were specifically leaky so that their task could never be done, was the whole idea.
But they were sentenced to that as punishment for the commission of a crime, sentenced by the gods, presumably.
Right.
So maybe you could draw an analogy there that somebody back then, the story of the Danaids would be an example of the gods' punishment for doing something wrong, and maybe that you would immediately jump to the conclusion that it's something about the gods that he's condemning. So I don't know.
It's an interesting thing there, because, like I said, originally I was leaning towards seeing the mind in its original state as being the good thing, but it sounds, at least according to that, Although maybe, and I'm literally just thinking on the fly here, maybe it's the whole idea that people are inclined. He talks a little bit later there about if people don't know the causes of things, they're naturally inclined to look for reasons of the gods and that sort of thing. So maybe he's using that as this vessel leaky thing that you put stuff in it and it becomes corrupted. Maybe that's sort of the precursor to the natural inclination to ascribe things to the gods.
Yeah, I think we've probably hit that hard enough because it is probably some combination of all these things that we're talking about. We probably hit it hard enough. Okay, but in the same section, he therefore purged the mind by true philosophy. Now, the word true philosophy and true reason sometimes appears, it seems like, in Lucretius, if I remember correctly. So it would be important to say, if in fact that is what is in the Loeb and is what in the original, if he does say right reason or true philosophy, I do like to bring out the fact that it's not philosophy in general, because there can be philosophy that's wrong and philosophy that's damaging. If in fact it does say true philosophy, that would be significant. I think maybe with,
the Loeb goes the whole poetical route here is therefore with truth-telling words he scourged the heart. And the heart, the mind, same thing, but wow, with truth-telling words evidently is the original sense.
Right. Okay. Truth-telling as opposed to lie-telling or false-telling words, maybe.
Or misleading or that sort of thing.
Yeah. And I see something else that may be worth commenting on. At least I'm looking now at the Loeb edition. It's probably in this Browne version too. Right after what you just read, he says he put a limit to desire and fear, and then there's a comma, and then he showed what was the chief good to which we all move and pointed the way. We have been discussing recently on the forum the issue of limit in the sense of boundary and or end. The word finis, end, in the sense of a boundary, and also in the sense of a goal or a target. And so here's a sample, if again where we can rely on the translation, where he's using both analogies right next to each other, as if indeed both are important. So that might be something to get out of that he pointed the way, a straight and narrow path by which we might run thither without turning. He's showing us both the goals of life and the limits of things. I guess is the way I would say it in normal conversation.
I would agree.
Because whenever I hear the word limit, I think about speed limits, and I think that I'm always wanting to drive faster than the speed limit, so I always see a limit as a very negative thing. And
more of a suggestion than an actual.
That's right, in terms of speed anyway, yeah. I've always wanted to live in Germany like Martin so I could drive on the Autobahns where there's no speed limit. Is that still the case, Martin?
Yes, it's still the case. I mean, there are some parties wanting to put a stop on it, but others defend it. So let's see how long it will be kept. But of course, it's not everywhere. So where it would be too dangerous, there are speed limits, signs for speed limits. It depends on the situation. I read about half of it has limits, actually. For example, in the area around Cologne, I think everything has limits because there are a lot of crossings, entrance, exits, and a lot of traffic. So that they normally have limits there. But on long stretches through the countryside, yes, there is no speed limit.
Okay. There's just so much in this paragraph that I've thought about over the years. And therefore, he laid open to us the chief good, that point of happiness we all aim at, and what it consists, and showed us the direct way that leads to it. Now, that's the Browne version. That would be worth comparing, I think, some of the other versions too.
I have the Loeb here. It says he showed what was that chief good to which we all move and pointed the way, that straight and narrow path by which we might run thither without turning.
Okay, so wait a minute. So that the word happiness is not in the Loeb or not in the original. Browne says he laid open to us the chief good, that point of happiness we all aim at. So is that an example of him putting that in there to say that the chief good is a point of happiness?
Yeah, it just says he showed what was that chief good to which we all move and pointed the way.
Okay, interesting.
It seems to me, just in the whole thing where we were talking about Epicurus and this thing here, it almost seems like Browne may put his footnotes and parenthetical statements in the text itself rather than put them as a a footnote.
Mm-hmm. That's always something that I consider to be dangerous. On the other hand, I generally like the Browne rendition of things. I think that he's probably right in saying that the chief good is happiness. But of course, you get into the debate about that versus pleasure and
right,
and so forth.
And the Latin just has summum bonum. So just the chief good.
The summum bonum. Mm-hmm.
And I believe that's the word that Cicero uses in his writing as well.
But it's not necessarily what is in the letter to Menicius or in Epicurus's writing.
Yeah, as I remember, they're usually a little more specific.
And in what it consists. Now, that part is there, right? No. He showed what was that chief good to which we all move and pointed the way. But the part about being on the straight and narrow path does appear to be there in virtually everyone.
Correct.
And then, of course, we could continue laboriously through this paragraph by pointing out the misfortunes that commonly attend human life may flow from the laws of nature or from chance, whether from necessity or by accident, and by what means we are to oppose those evils and strive against them. So somebody who wants to go down the rabbit hole of discussing hard determinism and agency and free will would, I think, want to refer to this statement.
Yeah, and we've had some interesting conversations recently on free will and things like that on the forum as well.
Yeah, maybe if there's a central point to be summarized in that part of the discussion, it's that Epicurus held that some things are within our control and some things are not. And so he would not be somebody you'd put into some kind of a religious free will format to say that everything in life can be affected by you or changed by you. But on the other hand, he firmly acknowledges that some things can be changed by you, that you do have some degree of agency. And as we were talking recently, as kind of like Daniel Dennett will say in some of his material, it's very important for you to at least think you have control, again, lest you kind of fall into nihilism.
To be held responsible for your actions. If we say that nobody has free will, then nobody can be held responsible for their actions. And I know there are people who say that, so that's right. That's out there. But Epicurus definitely seems to come down on the side of that you are responsible for the actions that you take, that you have control of.
Right. With the practical issue being that if you get convinced that you can't have any control over your life, that many people find that, and I think they naturally would find that to be a very dispiriting and demoralizing and fatalistic attitude that certainly does not tend towards greater happiness in life.
And I find it interesting that, with this whole idea of things that you have control of and things that you don't, the Stoics seem to have talked like they cornered the market on that idea, and it comes up over and over again in Epicurus's writings. So I think that the Stoics that use that as their big idea, it's like, well, that's not your own. It's held by other schools, and Epicurus obviously taught the same thing. So.
And taught it much more consistently, because if you really get into the Stoic original viewpoint on the universe, you get all tied up in this fate and everything being the result of what God said and did and ordered and set in motion. And it's, at least in my small mind, it's hard to reconcile those two things. That if you think God controlled everything and set everything in motion and makes everything happen, then you're not going to have much room for the things that you can control and the things you can't. You're going to be just impelled towards everything is at God's will and out of my control. Whereas Epicurus, of course, sets the stage for there being a mechanism for some degree of agency.
Which is why the Stoics were allowed to have their writings transferred through the early Christian church and things like that.
Yes, indeed.
I'm just throwing it out there. Just throwing it out there.
Because some people's philosophy is easier to turn to the work of oppression and mind control than other people's philosophy is.
Just making an observation.
Yeah,
just making an observation. That's
not pointing in any particular direction.
No.
Okay, so
Well, you're right. There's more in this section than what I thought there would be.
This beginning of book 6 has been one of my favorite sections of the whole of Lucretius ever since I started reading it, primarily for this discussion of what we're talking about here, because it's one of the clearest statements of how significant Epicurus was. And one of the reasons it's significant to me about that is that you get so much of a loosey-goosey feeling in the world today, and when you read about Epicurus, about what he was interested in, and whether it's pleasure, whether it's physics, whether it's epistemology, or what it is. But when you lay it out like Lucretius does here about what Epicurus was doing and why it was significant, it really helps, I think, to put it in perspective.
And it really does get at the fact that Epicurus was building a firm foundation for his philosophy, and everything really does hang together. I know whenever I first became interested in the philosophy that it was like, oh yeah, the physics is, it's like just, old pre-science sort of stuff. But if you look at it, I mean, whether it's factually correct or not, or however you want to phrase that, it definitely builds the foundation for everything that comes after it. And it's such a coherent and solidly built system that it's like by the time he gets to the putting the capstone on the pyramid, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I get it now. It's like, yeah,
right.
And we might as well enjoy these sections because, man, we got a lot of wind and thunder and lightning coming up. So Lordy be.
And death and destruction and plague and bearings and so forth.
Well, at least that can. I mean, but I was reading ahead and looking at the thunder and the lightning and the wind. I'm like, oh man.
Yeah. Oh, you were looking at the death as a relief from the thunder.
Exactly.
Well, that's definitely part of the lesson, I think.
There you go.
Don, I don't know that you've been with us when we ran into, I don't know how many different times this analogy to boys trembling and fearing everything in the dark night occurs. I know it's at least once earlier, if not twice earlier. But this may be the first time that you've been with us where we've run into this analogy, and might be worth spending a few minutes talking about it, because he uses it so frequently and is comparing the problems when he says that men torment themselves in vain and are tossed about in a tempestuous ocean of cares to no purpose, and compares them to boys or children who tremble at everything in the dark night. So we in the open day fear things as vain and as little to be dreaded as those children who are dreaming, basically. So that's one aspect of this repeated theme, that many of the real problems and torments of life are something we have no reason to fear whatsoever, and they're just made up by us.
Childish fears and that sort of thing.
I guess probably that you could put the whole of religion into that category. That's basically the way he's analyzing. It's all made up as if little children dreaming about monsters in the dark. And then the very last sentence of this passage is again one of those, is part of that passage that is repeated so often, that this terror of the mind, this darkness, not the sun's beams nor the bright rays of day can scatter, but the light of nature and the rules of reason. And therefore I shall the more readily proceed to execute what I have done. And I've always thought it's worth making the point that it's not just the rules of reason, and it's not just the light of nature that he's referring to and comparing that to the sun, but he's talking about both of them.
Right.
And I think there's something to be drilled home about that it's not just necessarily seeing something, but you also have to have a framework of understanding things. And I don't know what Latin is used there for the rules of reason. Well, now Loeb says, by the aspect and law of nature.
Yeah, the Latin is sed naturae species ratioque. So naturae and species looks like species in English.
But I heard you say ratio.
Ratioque, yeah. So that would be reason. So,
well, then here in Loeb, he's not using the word reason. He translates that phrase as by the aspect and law of nature. And ratio, that's one of those things.
So yes. Sed naturae species ratioque. So I'm trying to see. So sed is of course but. So that's just the conjunction there. But so if somebody whose Latin is better than mine, I guess would be. But naturae would be of nature.
Yeah, right. And
species, and
I think that's more like spectacle or something about seeing or observing, though, right? I don't know what the root of specio is, but I do think that would be the aspect, I guess.
Let me see if I can.
If in fact it means spectacles or something about seeing, but specius ratioque, that's two different things. And to translate ratio as law, okay, so maybe natura is of nature, but, and then you rearrange the lines, but by the aspect and the ratio of nature. Ratio, I wouldn't think ratio means law.
So let's see here. So I got my Perseus link up here. So let's just double check. Yeah, so naturae, of course, is the plural noun for nature. Species, the initial definition is a sight, look, view, appearance, or aspect.
So that would be aspect.
So that's that one.
And then ratio.
Ratioque is reckoning, number, casting up account, calculation. Let's look at the actual LSJ here.
And see, that's what Browne translates as rules of reason, and we should I can look at Monroe and Bailey as well.
Course, conduct, procedure, mode, manner, method. It's also the faculty of the mind which forms the basis of computation and calculation, and hence of mental action in general. So judgment, understanding, reason.
Yeah, it certainly seems to me that it's got some kind of a mental processing implication. Mm-hmm. And law of nature, to me, would not be the same thing at all.
Yeah, and Browne might, he might be giving a little bit more sort of editorial opinion, but it might actually be closer to the idea.
Yeah, I'm surprised to see that Monroe says law of nature. But then Bailey, who does, to me, weird things sometimes, comes up with, but by the outer view and the inner law of nature. Now, outer view and inner law, I don't know that I see that. Yeah, to me, Browne's rendition is probably superior.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that the Latin's parsing the Latin is always an art and not a science. So.
Right. Okay. I have successfully slowed us down to the point where we've only got like 2 paragraphs done, and we're almost at the end of a normal length session. Since I remember that Martin's great-grandfather was a weaver, maybe we can at least touch on the beginning of 43 says, I taught the fabric of the world was mortal, and the heavens were formed of corruptible seeds. Yeah, this was definitely going to carry us at least to the end of the day, because this is one of those things that has always been important to me too, about the necessity that everything will be dissolved. It's that rule we've discussed before, or that observation that everything that comes together eventually splits apart, which is a pretty significant thing, I think.
And Lucretius seems to do this from time to time, that he'll just sort of summarize what he's talked about in the last 2, 3, 4 books, and just to sort of it seems like he's just reminding people, it's like, okay, we've gone over this, here's my bullet points again, just to reiterate, here's what I did, remember what I did, because we're going to build on that.
Yeah. That reminds me, in my early reading of or listening to Lucretius, I think I've said this before, that I really enjoyed listening to the Charlton Griffin version on audible.com. And one of the things I did as I was in my early years of listening to this is I went through each of these 6 books and just chopped the rest of it off and just kept these opening sections like this one from book 6. And listen to this over and over and over, because there's just so much in these opening sections of each book. Attend now to what remains, especially since the hope of carrying the prize has encouraged me to ascend the chariot and engage in so noble a race. I kind of like to think that that's what we're doing in our Lucretius podcast, don't you? We have been encouraged to ascend the chariot and engage in the noble race of identifying the nature of things and the summum bonum.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. The Loeb translation gives a footnote there about the chariot, that Empedocles also used the metaphor of the poet and the chariot, bringing the light of truth to the world, sort of thing, in his fragment 4, according to Loeb.
Is that the Phaethon chariot or the sun?
Not necessarily. It sounds like it's its own little cart that they're talking about. So it's like, it's like the Empedocles is his it's translated in one place as, "O white armed maiden, muse thee I approach, drive and send to me meek piety's well-reined chariot of song.
So there's an analogy with poets using chariots.
So he's
asking,
asking the muse to send him the chariot to send him on his way and do his work. But I thought it was interesting that Empedocles is the one that Loeb mentions there. They mention Parmenides as well, but the fact that they mention Empedocles, that if I remember correctly, Lucretius has mentioned him positively in a couple other sections of the poem as well. And later on, when he brings up Calliope, Empedocles also references Calliope in another fragment. It's Calliope of the beautiful dear voice, be near me now beseeching I, whilst I speak excelling thoughts about the blessed gods. So Calliope is obviously the muse of inspiration there.
We're not going to get to that today because that's at the very end, but that word Calliope has always been a fascinating word to me. It refers to a musical instrument, or did you look that up, Don? Do you know what Calliope means?
I mean, it's obviously it's the original name of the one muse, but it is a musical instrument now. That isn't it the one that they use in the circus?
There's something about a circus, yeah. In fact, is it the merry-go-round a calliope, or is it like I said a minute ago, just throwing that out there, is it a musical instrument? Martin, do you know what a calliope is?
No, I'm just looking it up also.
A keyboard instrument resembling an organ, but with notes produced by steam whistles, used chiefly on showboats and in traveling fairs.
Okay. But it is a musical instrument.
It is a musical instrument too. And Calliope was the eldest of the muses, the goddess of, she was also the goddess of eloquence, who bestowed her gifts on kings and princes.
I see the Wikipedia entry says, so called from the ecstatic harmony of her voice. And Hesiod and Ovid called her the chief of all the muses.
There you go. So if you're going to the translation is beautiful voiced is the actual literal meaning of her name. So I guess if you're a poet and you want to call on a muse, then she's the one to get.
It's also worth noting, I think, that he says that since the difficulties that once attended the course are removed, and I would certainly say that that's a reference to all the points he's made in the past and all of the things that you're supposed to remember from what you've been taught already, and how the roughness of the way is made favorable and easy. There's a line in Frances Wright's A Few Days in Athens that evokes in my mind that she made a reference similar to how the way of life is really, in a sense, if you figure it out, according to true philosophy, it's in many ways, it is an easy life.
Oh, that's the whole, what is necessary is easy. Nature has made what is necessary is easy to get and all that sort of thing. So
right.
Yep.
Okay. And then he makes the comment that the wonders men behold in the earth and the heavens perplex their minds and make them humble with the fear of the gods and press them groveling to the ground. I got into a debate on Facebook recently about whether religion causes people to be oppressed and grovel to the ground or not. But this is another reference. I certainly think it does. And
that's a discussion. That's
that should not be that should be beyond debate, but it's in the opening of book 1 as well in that passage about Epicurus. There's no doubt about his attitude being, I don't know if you call it hostile or not, but you probably could call it hostile towards religion, towards false religion anyway.
Tantum religio, man.
Yes. And being ignorant of the causes of these events, they are forced to confess the sovereignty and give up everything to the command of these deities.
And here's that leaky, corrupting vessel again that your minds are obviously inclined to move that direction, it seems to me.
Oh, and on that same point, Don, I can't help but think as well, back in Cicero's own Ends, the Torquatus section begins. He talks about how Epicurus looked to young animals before they are corrupted,
right,
as being the example of
which I think is odd. I mean, sorry to circle back around to this, but I think it's odd that he uses babies and children as the models for how we should approach pleasure and pain. But then he's saying that the mind or the vessel, if we're going to use that is corrupted in and of itself and needs to be.
That is exactly why I don't think
I got some cognitive dissonance on that one.
Yeah, I don't think that's why I think he's not talking about the vessel itself. He's talking about the corruption, maybe the effect of everything as you grow up and you are corrupted by these false philosophies and false religions. And he may be talking about just the disposition that we have because we don't know everything and because we want to know everything, that can lead us in that direction. But to call mind at birth something that's already corrupted, I doubt that's what he would have meant. He would have been focused on the forces that corrupt it as you grow up, since, as you just said, he says that's what you should look to determine what nature's goal is. You should look at young things before they are corrupted.
Yeah, this might be a good point to go back and really dig into the Latin and look at some various translations and really see how that, because I find it hard to believe that that's what he's saying, that the vessel, the mind itself is the problem.
Right. And he doesn't say the mind. He says the pot or the vessel or whatever. And so it's left to us to figure out what it means. And frankly, the vessel is, to me, or a pot or a vessel is something that carries something within it. It's not the thing itself so much. Right. So they raise over themselves a set of cruel tyrants who the wretches fancy can do all things, because they know nothing of what can be or what cannot be, or by what means a finite power is fixed to every being, and a boundary immovable which it cannot pass. And so anybody who wants to say it doesn't matter if we study the physics of Epicurus or not, all he cared about was pleasure. You don't need to worry about his views of nature. I think Epicurus would be the first one to say that's ridiculous, because you have to know.
I wrote 35 books on nature. Come on.
That's right. The limitations and the way that the world works is the whole foundation of the philosophy, and you would not come to the ethical conclusions that you come to if you didn't have significantly similar views of the nature of the way things work that he came to. Because if you're not aware of those things, you are more liable to mistakes and to be carried widely from the right way.
I mean, Lucretius has just spent 5 books laying it all out for you.
Right. Martin, since this is another one of those days where I've talked too much and haven't gotten enough out of you, as we begin to close, what do you think about what we've talked about today?
I mean, it was all agreeable, and I did not really have much to say on this, so it's that was the reason why I kept so quiet.
Well, I think part of what was in my mind in talking so much, like I said, I've always enjoyed the beginnings of these books particularly much, but I also am thinking about the way we're going to be spending week after week in a couple of weeks going through the plague of Athens, and going to have a whole lot.
Well, like I said, that's the relief. We got a lot of wind and rain and thunder to get through before we get to the plague.
That's right. The world completely being destroyed, I guess, comes before that. Okay, well, Don, you have summary thoughts today?
No, I don't think. Oh, the only other thing I thought was really interesting was as I mentioned, I found those fragments from Empedocles, and if I can briefly revisit whenever we were talking about evolution and that the beings sprung from the ground that Lucretius was talking about. And I seem to remember us talking about that he was against the Empedoclean idea of individual body parts came first and then the body parts assembled themselves. Well, sure enough, in the collection of Empedocles fragments, so if anybody looks it up online, it's Empedocles fragments about 57 to 61 where he talks about this. But 57 starts out that there budded many a head without a neck, and arms were roaming, shoulderless and bare, and eyes that wanted foreheads drifted by. And then later, creatures of countless hands and trailing feet. So there's the whole idea of the individual body parts looking for each other to become assembled. So Empedocles was indeed talking about that there were heads without necks and shoulderless arms and eyes without foreheads. So there you go. That's the origin of that one.
Wow. So there certainly was good reason for Lucretius and Epicurus to be making allusions about that.
Right. It's like well, Empedocles, you got a basic idea, right? Yeah, things did evolve from other things, but there were no arms and eyes roaming around by themselves. That's where we're going to draw the line. That's where we're going to put the boundary stone on that one.
And Empedocles was Greek or Italian? For some reason, I have in my mind he's Italian.
Well, he was definitely one of the pre-Socratic. So whether on the coast of Turkey or in Greece or in Syracuse or one of the other, but he was definitely one of the pre-Socratics. So
okay. Who was the poet that Lucretius started talking about in book 1 about having a green jacket or something like that? Wasn't there somebody in particular who's got is that Empedocles?
You stumped the panel on that one.
Okay, all right. Well, I may be editing that out because it may be a ridiculous comment, because I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking about the Masters golf tournament and not the Empedocles to have a green jacket.
You do need some sleep, I think.
That's exactly right. All right. right. Well, that section may well not make the final cut for the edit today, but we'll see. Okay. Well, we are long, and it's going to take me a long while to edit this one too, I bet, this week. So does anybody have anything else before we bring it to an end?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Very good. Very good. All right. Then let's close for the day, and we will be back next week. Thanks again for your time.
Sounds good. Always a pleasure, gentlemen. Have a good weekend.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye.